This sponsorship ad is paid for by Yes on A, Safeguard Our San Diego Countryside, Committee Major Funding from Endangered Habitats League. Measure A, the SOS Initiative, encourages developers to follow San Diego County's long-term growth plans. Measure A aims to stop deals which allow sprawl developments to be built in high fire risk areas that lack proper infrastructure. A yes vote on Measure A gives a voice to the people. Trust people, not politicians. Voice of San Diego relies on sponsorships and member support. If you'd like to sponsor the Voice of San Diego podcast and share your message, contact Julianne Marco at julianne@vosd.org.
Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I'm Scott Lewis, the CEO and editor-in-chief at Voice of San Diego. I'm joined, as always, by assistant editor Andrew Keats.
What's up?
And managing editor Sarah Libby.
Hello.
It is primary week, finally. We've been talking about this election for 14 years. We've got a fun show this week. It's our now traditional election draft episode. We are going to choose different races between us. I think 3 rounds, 3 each. But first, I wanted to mention a couple of things in your feed right now. First off, I did an interview with Mara Elliott, the city attorney. We had a bunch of questions stored up because we haven't had a chance to do that since 2015. I found it interesting. She was still adamant that SDSU's deal, that Measure G, the voter initiative that mandated the city give or sell the land around the stadium in Mission Valley to San Diego State University, she still thinks that's illegal. She even hinted there was a new case supporting her view that it's illegal, but of course she decided not to fight that anymore. And so I asked her why, and we went on about that. So it was a good conversation. I thought it was interesting. Also, Andy talked to Kenya Taylor. I talked to Joel Anderson, 2 county supervisor candidates. Anyway, in your feed are a bunch of very special and good interviews with some of these candidates for office, so check them out. All right. The primary is just days away. It's March 3rd. It's Super Tuesday. So for this week's podcast, we're going to bring back the Voice of San Diego election draft. Longtime fans of the pod know we had our first draft in November 2018, and you loved it so much, we're going to do it again. Here's how it works. We are all going to pick a race and go around, and then we'll do that in 3 rounds. And these are the races that we're most interested in following on Tuesday night to see how they turn out and why. Well, let's get into it. We have our draft of the election. We'll have 3 rounds. Each of us will pick a race and talk about it. And we will start with Sarah.
All right. My first pick is going to be the D3 County Soups race. Not just because it's a very exciting race and could eventually in November determine control of the Board of Supervisors, but because I want to highlight the fact that I chose this race several months ago when we did a much earlier draft, and just to really highlight the foresight and
doubling down on your ownership over it as well.
Yeah.
Okay, just to clarify, D3, District 3 is in the counties. There's 5 supervisors. District 3 is the northern coastal part, but it also stretches over to Escondido. It is currently being represented by the incumbent Kristen Gaspar. She's a Republican. She ousted a Democrat who was in that seat 4 years ago. Now she's up for re-election. It seems pretty obvious that she will make it through the primary, but the question is who will go with her.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's sort of been slow to get going only because Tara Lawson-Remer and Olga Diaz have been at pains to demonstrate how little they differ on most policies.
Yeah.
You know, it's been the odd race where months of debates and stories have not made it any clearer to me where they would be considerably different as voters on the County Board of Supervisors.
Yeah, so Scott mentioned some of those interviews that we did, and Jesse Marks conducted interviews with the two Democratic candidates, and they just basically emphasized that they would approach things differently, and that their backgrounds and all the experiences they've gone through have, of course, shaped them in different ways, which is true of all humans, I suppose.
Yeah, it's not wrong. It is true that elected officials are more than their voting record. Like, different people champion different issues, are able to muster more political capital for one thing or another. So that's all true. It's still just not all that obvious to me how different they're different because they're different people, yes, but I don't really know how they would be different as officials.
Well, I think the interests in the race, though, they like interest groups, they obviously see like significant differences. On the one hand, the labor groups have broken seriously. And then the Chamber of Commerce weighed in with a mailer. On the one hand, it showed Tara Lawson Remer, this dark picture of her sowing discord and dystopian realities into the world. And then on the other side, it had Olga Diaz, like, yay, Olga Diaz for supervisor. That was one. And there was this exact same mailer with that, but Kristen Gaspar on the other side. So the Chamber of Commerce basically saying, we're fine with Olga Diaz or Kristen Gaspar, but not with Tara Lawson Remer. And then you have the largest union of county workers who have really dumped a lot of money.
So much money.
In support of Tara Lawson Remer and against Olga Diaz. And yeah, to your point, like, I think that there's this, I think there really is a difference of approach. So I know I did the interview with Tara Lawson Remer, and I think she really is more of a maybe like a Bernie Sanders or Warren type Democrat, much more activist, much more, fierce sort of ideological, I think, perspective. And I think Olga Diaz is probably more of a Buttigieg type or something.
Pragmatic, practical.
Yeah, and more independent, and I don't know. So and they're really at the heart of a lot of these discussions is this issue of this country club development at Enniscadito, where she supported how many homes? Like several hundred homes on this country club property. It turned out to be a really controversial discussion, and she's getting hammered by some of her opponents.
I mean, I have to assume that, to use the two biggest examples, SEIU and the Chamber, that they have gleaned some substantial difference between the two candidates.
Yeah. Right.
But I guess that's what's interesting to me in the campaign is that it genuinely seems like the candidates publicly have been at pains to flatten those differences that interest groups have been able to pick up on in other settings somehow.
All right. Good choice. Good choice. All right, Andy, your pick.
With the second pick in the 2020 primary draft, I will take the City of San Diego mayor race.
Hey.
Yeah. So it's a little basic. This is like a little bit like ordering boba tea or something, I think.
Yeah. Spaghetti and meatballs in an Italian place.
Yeah, exactly. Or, like a pulled pork sandwich with coleslaw on top at a barbecue restaurant.
There you go.
But I think that this race is the most. So I should say, Mayor Kevin Faulconer is termed out. This is the race to replace him. There are 4 major candidates: Assemblyman Todd Gloria, Councilwoman Barbara Bree, and community activist Tasha Williamson among Democrats, and 1 Republican, Scott Sherman. I think this one's interesting to me because I have something that I'm intrigued by no matter the outcome.
Yeah.
If Barbara Bree gets through and joins the presumptive favorite in Todd Gloria, that means we already know that a Democrat will take over the mayor's office, and it will seem like a fast forward to this period we've been talking about for what seems like a few years, where races are not between Democrats and Republicans anymore, but different types of Democrats. And we would already see 2 different types of Democrats who have kind of sorted themselves out along an interesting set of ideological lines that I think you could see having some staying power as the areas in which local Democrats divide themselves as they assume more and more power in city government. And then if Scott Sherman gets through, then I think it says something a little bit different, which is that there might not be quite as much power in some of these populist type causes that Barbara Bree has run on. Also that it is very difficult to win Democratic support without groups like the Democratic Party or something along those lines. And if Tasha Williamson gets through, then that would be fascinating because she's not raised much money. She has not collected many endorsements. She's run a very focused campaign around criminal justice movement, and that would certainly say something about where the city is if she was able to get into the top 2.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about Tara Lawson-Remer and Olga Diaz, that's such a different race, even just among 2 Democrats, than a Barbara Bree and Todd Gloria campaign would be, in which they've staked out very significant differences.
Yeah, in both races so far, what we're talking about is which 2 candidates advance, which is basically the second place or the second spot in the runoff. And I think this fight between Scott Sherman and Barbara Bree for the spot in the runoff of the mayor's race is fascinating. There was a fascinating moment last week, a debate on KUSI that you turned me on to while it was going. It was really weird.
It was a fascinating document. I want to like pull it out and study it.
We'll put it in the show notes.
It's Ulysses. You need like a reader's compendium to understand exactly why it's so fascinating.
But there was a moment. So in the congressional race, the 50th congressional district, Carl DeMaio and Darrell Issa are going at each other. And Darrell Issa is really using one thing in particular to hammer Carl DeMaio. And that's this statement he made when he was running for mayor to us, saying that local police should not enforce immigration law. And that is the heart of sanctuary city debates, right? Like that's basically the whole debate, that the federal government wants to mobilize and deputize local law enforcement to do this sort of work. And DeMaio is paying the price, I think, in that district because they're hammering it. Even though it's a very logical, pragmatic, legal take.
Yes.
Scott Sherman was asked this, and it was a really interesting moment. He was asked this on KUSI, what he thinks about local police enforcing immigration law. And the exchange was fascinating.
With him, on the same side with him. San Diego is not a sanctuary city. We have federal agencies that deal with immigration. Our job from our police is to enforce the laws that are required of us legally, no more, no less. I don't want our police officers out enforcing immigration laws.
So if Mr. Trump comes along and says, hey, I want my ICE officials, I want you to work with my ICE officials, you would say to Mr. Trump?
That's not our job. That's not our job. That's not what we're supposed to. You have your ICE people who are supposed to do those types of things.
Councilmember Bree.
Mr. Trump.
Yeah, fair. Bootlicker.
So on the one hand, Sherman is that's obviously very distinctive position from the Trump types. But then he's got a flyer out there that says like, and let's stop with this nonsense with the bike lanes. You know what I mean? He's definitely
yes.
like going to the right.
Yeah, he's not running as a squishy liberal Republican.
Yeah, and at the same time, he's literally laughing off that question as like absurd. Like, of course they can't enforce immigration laws.
Yeah,
yeah. It's. I mean, he would be a fun guy to watch. I mean, if you were like setting odds, if he were to get through, if you were setting odds on his ability to actually win and become mayor, they would be pretty low, I think. Whether that's how it would turn out or not, I don't know. But he would have a fun time running for mayor, and I think you would see a lot of stuff like this where he didn't particularly care what he got himself into by saying certain things.
You know, I run into a bunch of normal people who don't follow this stuff. And several times already, I've had people come up to me saying, or talk to me saying, like, why is Scott Sherman running? He lost the Chargers. Like this his antipathy to the Chargers deal or whatever, it reigns through a lot of issues. It's fascinating. So,
yeah, it's always interesting, the things that stick.
All right. Good choice. Mayor's race. You guys are going pretty.
A lot of chalk so far.
All right. Fair enough. With the third pick in the 2020 primary election draft, Voice of San Diego, I'm going to choose California Congressional District 53.
Whoa. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Okay, so I think I've kind of realized late that these issues are maybe being decided right now. You know what I mean? Like, I knew that like intellectually, but it's really starting to set in that it could be happening. There's a fascinating mailer that went out from supporters of Sarah Jacobs, who's running. She's shown really well in the polls. Again, this is the congressional race to replace Susan Davis. Sarah Jacobs is a Democrat running. Georgette Gomez, the council president, obviously jumped into the race with a big splash. Janessa Goldbeck, a lot of Democrats are running. And then there's a couple of Republicans. It's a very dominant Democratic district, but there is, if the Republicans are able to consolidate the vote, they could make the second spot in the runoff. And so that was the part that informed this ballot or this mailer that went out. Supporters of Sarah Jacobs sent out a mailer, basically to Republicans communicating that this candidate, Chris Stoddard, is a Republican and does all the things and says all the things they like. So we now have another instance where people are trying to pick their opponent. That's happening in the City Council District 9, where Kelvin Barrios supporters are trying to get the Republican Andrew Gade advanced. It's happening in District 2, the county supervisor race, where Joel Anderson is trying to promote Kenya Taylor to Democrats because he wants to run against Kenya Taylor, not Steve Voss. So it's a common thing we see now, but Sarah Jacobs would love to run against a Republican, it seems like, because she thinks the race would be over.
Which, so like you say, this is a Democratic district, but not so much that it's impossible for a Republican to get through. I think that's probably what they're looking at. If you look at Susan Davis's voter total, she was winning every race, and none of them were at all close. But the Republican was getting 30% of the vote, something like that. It's not like some of these Brooklyn districts where you get like 90-10, 95, 95-5 turnouts. So yeah, it seems like a good strategy, and I think maybe was an underrated possibility when all these Democrats decided to run. I get the impression that at the time that they were making those decisions, there was a presumption that two people would get through, and so that they didn't have quite as much of a risk facing them. And so I think the thing that's most fascinating about this, at least on election night, is did Georgette Gomez throw away an awful lot of political capital that she had accumulated in a relatively short period of time to run for this office and lose just 5 months later?
Yeah, she got that last minute boost from AOC this week endorsing her. But then Janessa Goldbeck also had the surprise UT endorsement. So there's just sort of like a lot of competing factors swirling around.
And if, say, Georgette Gomez manages to get through and that this bid to try to boost a Republican doesn't work, and you do have Democrat on Democrat, you could imagine a really nationally resonant race when you have a self-funded granddaughter of a billionaire running against a AOC Bernie-backed former environmental justice advocate.
Just to be clear, so Bernie Sanders endorsed Georgette Gomez.
She did not endorse him.
Yeah, like you said, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez endorsed Georgette. She did not reciprocate for Bernie, though, and like conspicuously, kind of.
Yeah, and Sarah Jacobs hasn't run a Bloomberg-esque towards the center. She's all of her messaging has been very in keeping, very doctrinaire Democrat of 2020 set of views. But I think the dynamics would still rise up if you had self-funded billionaire versus a AOC Bernie-backed candidate on the line.
Yeah, and it's yet another race in which potentially it's a dem-on-dem contest, and yet completely different dynamics in all three.
Yeah, all said.
All right, I get the next pick. With the fourth pick in the 2020 Voice of San Diego primary draft, my pick. I can't decide. I guess I'm going to do.
I mean, this is who you are. You're either going to tell the truth about who you are, or you're going to lie to yourself right now in front of a microphone.
I think there are two distinct versions of me making this decision.
I can only think of one version.
There's one version of you. And the fact that you even think there's two means you're demonstrating a severe lack of self-awareness.
I'm just going to do this just because you've pressured me and bullied me into doing it. But I know, and I'll explain later why the other one also is me. But yes, Measure C.
Yeah.
There it is.
The race to the race to see if the mayor can finally raise the hotel room tax to expand the convention center and fund homelessness and roads. And so, yeah, I mean, it's gotten hammered. It got opposition in a way that I don't think people anticipated, funded opposition. We heard last, Michael McConnell has spent $370,000 of his own money opposing it, but he did not need funded opposition. So they all say they need 2/3 of the vote to make it pass. Now, we all know that it was created and it progressed as a citizens initiative for the express purpose of trying in potential to exploit a legal loophole that may make it possible for them to argue in court that it should pass with just a majority of the vote of San Diego city voters. And so the big question will be, I don't think it gets 2/3 with that much spent opposition. I mean, it's very difficult to get any 2/3.
It's difficult to get 2/3 with no opposition at all.
Yeah. And so then the question, I think, is how much over 50 does it get? Does it even get? I think it does, probably, maybe. But does it get over 50? And if it does, do they go to court right away? Probably. And how does that work out? So that's what I'm going to be watching for right away is just how that looks. It could be a really gnarly night for the mayor.
Yeah. I think the only thing that's certain is that we will never be done dealing with this.
Well, so that's I think there's an interesting thing to watch at the end as well. It's, if it does not pass, let's say it doesn't pass, I'm still intrigued because I think there's a view among opponents, particularly, that there's a better deal to the left of this one. And maybe there is. I don't know exactly what that would be. It's not like people have involved me in secret conversations they have about what they're going to propose later. But
they're welcome to them.
Yeah, sure. But the 66.7% threshold is important because no matter how much the city of San Diego is shifting, it still gives the minority a veto right. That's how it's designed.
Yes.
The purpose of that provision is to give the minority of voters an opportunity to reject any sort of tax increase. And so even in a world where you have, a 7-2 Dem city council and a Dem mayor and a chamber of commerce and convention industry that's willing to move to the left on this sort of thing, it still has to be approved by 66.7% of voters. And I don't know what that looks like if this doesn't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Hotels are very aware of that power and they will use it too.
With the 5th pick in Voice of San Diego's 2020 primary draft, I take Measure A.
All right.
Is that chalk? How is everybody's mock draft looking at this point?
I'm still doing pretty good.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I regaled so I was at a lunch yesterday.
A luncheon.
Okay. Chicken luncheon. And it was to honor high school ASB presidents. And there was a whole table full, and I regaled them with an explanation because 3 of them were turning 18 or had turned 18, could vote. So regaled them with an explanation of Measure A and B and a couple of the adults. And so I was very proud to be able to do that. There's nobody who understands any of it at all. Not a single person in the entire county.
I think that's true. Yes.
I was in a similar setting recently. Somebody asked me, and I started to explain, and I quickly watched their eyes glaze over and realized that I had gone into far more detail than they were interested in at all. And I didn't really know what to do from there.
I told one of the kids, I said, look, if you vote yes on A, vote no on B. If you vote no on A, vote yes on B. That's ideological consistency, I think. Or
here's the question: is ideological consistency important?
No, but it's a first step towards some sort of principle.
It's one way of organizing your thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay, so Measure A is the measure that would take any land use development plan that does not comply with the county's general plan. It's general outline for growth and development. And any project that was proposed by developers that doesn't comply with that would go to a vote of all residents of the county, as opposed to the current situation, which is County Board of Supervisors gets to approve those things.
Yeah, if you want to build something and the zoning's not right for it, the county can approve it. This would say, no, it has to go to the entire county vote.
And so there's a lot of land use discussions and policy impacts associated with this. Those are certainly the most important and most far-reaching impacts. And that is what most people should talk about right now when they talk about this. But that's not actually what I am most intrigued by this. What I am intrigued by is as a test of whether campaigns matter. Because it is so, the no on A has spent so much money, has been so ever present in the media. They have put op-eds all over the place. They have aggressively worked the endorsement circuit. They got the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, elected officials from all over the place are with no on A.
Most everyone except for some isolated environmentalists and such.
Yes. And yet, if yes on A passes, it will suggest to me, this is sort of unfalsifiable, but it would just suggest to me that there was no stopping it. That it strikes with voters in such a way that there's no undoing it by any type of campaign. And that'll just be something that I'm interested to see as a test case.
I feel like what might negate that is just the fact that it is so complicated and it's hard to get anyone to wrap their minds about what it does or what it doesn't do and what the right argument is for it. Because, like, yes, the no on A people have been ubiquitous, but like ballot box planning doesn't resonate as a message to, I think, the average voter who probably don't know what those words mean.
Or why it would be bad.
Right.
Yeah.
The only counter to what you've just said, though, is that when people find things too complicated, usually they vote no.
That's true.
And so that would help the no side. And so I think a derivative of what you're saying, Andy, is that it actually gets baked in at the policy level when the lawyers at the county decide what it can say when it goes to the ballot, that's the moment that this discussion is settled, that campaign is settled, that the verbs they use, whatever words trigger whatever emotions in voters' heads, that happens before any of this campaigning happens.
The thing I have noticed in years of covering land use decisions is that development is more emotional than it is intellectual to most people. And you can talk to people about the policy debates and the trade-offs associated with building one type of project or another. But for the most part, my experience is that most people have a starting position. Their instinct is that it is not generally a good thing to build more housing. And you can work people off of that, but that's their default position. That is what I have sensed, and that's what I think is, people don't like the term, but I think that's a driving force behind NIMBYism, is that before you stop to think about things, before you start to really debate, most people begin on a guttural level thinking more development couldn't be good.
Well, good one. All right. Sarah Libby.
All right, with my next pick, the Voice of San Diego primary draft, I'm going to choose Assembly District 77.
Is that Mainshine?
Yes. So in many ways, this might be a weird pick because, one, it's not going to be decided on Tuesday. And two, it's not even going to be decided what two candidates make it through. I think that's pretty clear cut. Brian Mainshine is the incumbent, and he's being challenged by a Republican named June Cutter, who is a businesswoman and lawyer. But I just think
very active. She has a high energy.
Yeah. So I think whatever way they, land and whether she's able to actually beat him in the primary will be a really interesting dynamic to watch. This is the first race in which he's running as a Democrat. And he got a really close challenge 2 years ago. And like you said, I think there's a lot of anger swelling. June Cutter has been activating really intensely around AB 5 and some of the anger surrounding that, which Brian Mainshine voted for. And so again, I just think this first race out for him after this intense challenge and then the party flip will be really interesting to watch.
It could be, as you think, maybe like a harbinger of whether some of those issues, AB 5 is the issue about the new law that says if you serve the purpose of a company, you have to be an employee, you can't be a freelancer or independent contractor. And that's being reformed and such, but there is a lot of movement against it. And so this would be, I think what you're saying, a test whether it really did penetrate the voters' minds as something they wanted to revolt against.
I think that'll be a big factor, and also whether like this flip really helped him in the way that he maybe thinks it would is part of it too.
I think also AB 5, the mayor's race has a bit of a test case there. Barbara Bree has come out now. It's a little bit messy. She's run on a bunch of different things, so it would be hard to isolate and say, oh, she was able to get over the hump because of her AB 5 opposition. The other thing I'll say here, just because I don't think anybody is going to mention it, is boy, has Assemblyman Chris Ward, or Councilman Chris Ward running for Assembly, run a fulsome campaign.
I know, I've gotten so many mailers.
So much mail. And the number of lawn signs in my neighborhood far exceeds the mayor's race, the city council district race. It is for something that is not perceived as a competitive race. Chris Ward is all over the place.
Wants to own it. Doesn't want to mess around. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good choice. That's interesting. I think a lot of people watch that. Yeah. It probably won't even be solved on election night in November because it'll go on forever.
That
like
could
the last
be true.
one did.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to take a quick break, pay some bills. And on the other side, we'll get to our final round of picks for the primary. Stay with us.
This Voice of San Diego podcast is sponsored in part by the San Diego County Bar Association. As a nonprofit news organization, Voice of San Diego depends on our members, foundations, and sponsors to provide funding for the investigative journalism you expect from Voice of San Diego. The election of qualified judges is essential to our justice system. When you vote on March 3rd, you'll be able to choose from 11 candidates for judge running in 4 judicial races. For more than 40 years, the San Diego County Bar Association has provided evaluations of candidates running in contested judicial elections to help inform your decision. To view the evaluations for 2020, visit judgechoices.com. And if you like Voice of San Diego's work and want to become a sponsor, contact Julianne Marco at julianne@vosd.org.
All right. With my next pick, I'm going to go with Measure B.
Okay.
Now, the reason I think this one is interesting is because it, in some ways, feels like the opposite of Measure A in the sense that it doesn't seem all that complex to me to wrap your mind around if you're a voter. And so I think people might have a tendency to just vote no on everything, and there certainly has been messaging against Measure B, but it's just a development. And so if Measure A were to pass, these are the types of things that we would presumably be voting on in the future, and it's interesting in that sense of just what people are willing to approve. Especially, I don't think there's been a lot of, when Lilac Hills was on the ballot, we had a lot of reporting around various scandalous aspects of that. And I don't think there's that with this. It's just whether it's good policy or a good place to put a housing development.
Yeah. So just to be clear, if you're familiar with 4S Ranch, this is kind of the next 4S Ranch, same developer in those mountains. They've been trying to pass some sort of development like this for years. This is like the 6th attempt or something. And so it's in the Miriam Mountains along the I-5 there. And it was passed. They put together a plan. The County Board of Supervisors approved it. This is the first ordinance of the County Board of Supervisors that's been thrown to a referendum because of the funding that was provided by neighbors, specifically the Spa Golden Door. And so, I think this is an interesting question. We saw the Democratic Party come out against Measure A, but then also against this. So this exact type of development that said they want and need, but not this one.
Yeah.
So
also to your point about the maybe unpersuasive elements of procedural concerns, if you are persuaded by procedural concerns, then, and your point about ideological consistency, it's a bit of a twist here, But because this was a referendum, it was the County Board of Supervisors voted for this. So a vote against ballot box planning would somewhat counterintuitively be a vote for this project.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, if you don't like ballot box planning, you should support their decision to have passed this.
Yes. When you say it like that, it actually sounds pretty straightforward. I made it sound way more complicated.
Well, there you go.
Our editor's for.
All right, Andrew.
In the 8th pick of the Voice of San Diego primary draft, I take the San Diego City Council District 7 race. District 7.
Interesting. I didn't know if City Council can make an appearance or not. Frankly, there was 100,000 candidates running, and so we didn't want to have to wrestle with the primary on this. But okay, go on. So this is the area, and
this is the Mission Valley, Central City area. San Carlos, Linda Vista, that is represented currently by Scott Sherman, who's running for mayor. He is termed out regardless, and this is to be his replacement. There is one Republican running, Noli Zosa, who has a lot of money and a lot of support from establishment Republicans. They've put a lot of faith into him to control this seat. There are a handful of Democrats. Raul Campillo, who's a district deputy city attorney, has raised the most money and collected the most endorsements. Gun rights activist Wendy Wheatcroft has also put together a
gun control activist.
Did I say gun rights?
Sorry, just to be clear,
very
gun
much
violence prevention activist.
Yes. She would like to prevent gun violence.
Yes.
There you go.
And she's an activist around that desire of hers. Wendy Wheatcroft, she's put together a grassroots campaign. She hasn't raised much money, but she's been out there. I could see her getting through. The reason it's really interesting to me is because we don't know much about District 7 as it exists today. When Scott Sherman ran in 2012, he had one Democratic opponent, which meant it was capable of being, it was almost certain to be decided in June. This was back when elections could be determined in June if somebody got over 50%. And he did, not by much, but he did. So he won outright in June. When he ran for re-election in 2016, he was an incumbent and he did not run against an especially accomplished field and won in June again. So this District 7, as presently constituted, though it has been represented by a Republican for 8 years, has never gone to a November general election ballot. And so it's easy to presume that it's a safe Republican seat because it has been a safe Republican seat. But we know that the electorate in June versus November, or in this case March versus November, can look very different. And so we don't actually have any data points at all that tell us how the voters in this district behave voting for a city council seat when it's open and in a general election. So I think whichever Democrat gets through has a very good chance of winning against Noli Zosa. And it's the one that you could most see the Democratic establishment putting real money behind as an opportunity to flip one more seat from Republican to Democrat.
And there was,
Good one.
Yeah, that was a good choice. Michael Bloomberg came to town,
yes,
and spoke, and guess whose house he went to? He spoke in the backyard of Wendy Wheatcroft.
And in something of a trend, she did not endorse him.
Right. I think it's a really interesting test for her. Can you not have a lot of money, not have a lot of endorsements, but just purely on the sort of rhetoric and polarization around an issue that you have really owned? Can you vault that into enough notoriety and enough fame to get into that final?
And on an issue that the city isn't particularly active on?
Well, and also, I mean, it really hasn't been a big basis of her campaign.
Yeah.
It's a big basis of her public identity, persona and identity, but she has not been running. She's been much more active running on housing, really.
Yeah.
And then Raul Campillo's raised a lot of money, seems to come off well in a lot of these performances. Yeah, that's a great race to choose. Good job. It's fine.
Seems so disappointed.
I don't like it when you do well.
Is there a stadium measure for you to pick here?
All right. With the 9th and final pick in the 2020 Voice of San Diego primary election draft, I choose the other half of my brain, which is the California 50th congressional district.
Okay. That makes
You're
sense.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking that you had another version of yourself that was more flattering.
No. This is another one. I don't think the gravity of how it was probably going to be decided now or close, would have a good chance of being.
We are absolute parodies of ourselves. I can't believe we almost didn't pick
Yeah.
far and away the most nationally recognized race on the ballot.
We did, because I'm not a parody.
The Union Tribune made a 5-part film about this race. And I just picked the city council.
Yeah, 80-77 won't even be decided anymore.
I picked a city council race that cannot be decided.
All right. This is
kudos to those of you who listened to the end.
There is no incumbent in this race. Doesn't even exist. There's nobody in this seat at the moment.
And yet there's two they're all sort of incumbents. They've all been around for a while.
They're veteran. They are veteran people. I mean,
they are veteran people, but not veterans.
Every one of these people has experience as humans, accumulated experience as humans. One of whom has been running for office for a half decade.
Yeah. Okay, let's start here. So there is one prominent Democrat running, Mark Campanajard. In fact, the other Democrat who's running dropped out, endorsed him just recently. So Mark Campanajard seems like he almost came close to ousting the indicted Congressman Duncan Hunter last time. He seems like he's probably got good 40%. I don't know. Can probably carry that into a spot in the runoff. And so this fierce battle has broken out on the right. And Carl DeMaio, talk show host, former San Diego City councilman, he is running. He's raised a ton of money, but he's running against a man with a ton of money. Darrell Issa, former congressman, left the 49th district on the coast, and he says because he was getting an offer from the president, but really he knew he was going to get beat in that district. He now is running for this district. They're fighting about who is the most Trumpy of the Trumpy Republicans in this race. There's also Brian Jones, state senator, running. He's the only one that lives in the district as far as the Republicans go.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So this has turned into an extreme cage match between Carl DeMaio and Darrell Issa. It is just, I have a Issa DeMaio search on Twitter just to follow how fiery this gets. It is gnarly.
It's so gross.
It's a dynamic I have no familiarity with. A race entirely around all positive comments about yourself are how much you like President Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And all negative comments about your opponent are about how he doesn't like President Donald Trump enough. That's the entire race.
Yes.
There's nothing else in the race.
Yeah, and it's all of this fiery attack of like, you're a liberal, you're pro-abort, like not even just a pro-abortion, like pro. It's played out. So who pulls this blood feud out is going to be, I don't know. They're going to have to be wedded to Trump. They're going to have to just adore him as an idol, unblemished. And it's going to be, I just don't know who's going to pull out. There looked like a poll from the UT that showed Issa ahead. DeMaio threw out a poll, showed him ahead. I don't know how.
And they both have a lot of money and they both have a lot of name ID.
Yeah.
So those are the two easy things that you can fall back on and to set expectations around. When both people have a lot of money and a lot of name ID, and when they're essentially running the same campaign but just saying no, I am. I don't know how you determine how that's going to shake out.
Hey, Nate John here, producer for the show. Just jumping in to let you know real quick that we will be obsessively watching the results come in on Tuesday night, of course, and we'll have our weekly episode in your feed on Wednesday morning. So the week of the election, our show drops the morning after the election. So look out for that. And also, we'll have an election debrief live show. That's going to happen the week after the election. We're going to bring in a couple of guests to help us make sense of how things turned out on election night. That'll be at UC San Diego, and you can get tickets right now at VOSD.org/electionpod.
Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast. It's the most popular public affairs podcast recorded in downtown San Diego. If you haven't yet, be sure to check out San Diego Decides. That's our election podcast. We recently dropped an explainer episode in the feed on the state and local measures. That one is hosted by Sarah Libby. If you want more info on what's going to be on your ballot, get San Diego Decides wherever you listen to podcasts, or go online to VOSD.org/SDDecides. I'm Scott Lewis, CEO and Editor-in-Chief. Andrew Keats is Assistant Editor. Sarah Libby's Managing Editor. This show is produced by Nate John, Megan Wood, and Adriana Heldies, and it's recorded in the Voice of San Diego podcast studio, which is sponsored by the Bob Nelson Charitable Fund. Thank you, Bob Nelson Charitable Fund. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.